Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2013 Canadian psychological dark comedy titled Compulsion. Now, Compulsion runs for an hour and 28 minutes long. It is directed by Edigio Coccimiglio. It is produced by Gary Housem and Bill Marks. The script was done by Floyd Byers. It is based on the similar movie called 301 302, which was directed by Park Chul Soo down in South Korea. The score was done by Jerry Goldsmith, the cinematography by Vilmos Sigismund, and it is edited by D. Gillian Truster. And the stars of the movie are Heather Graham, Carrie-Anne Moss, Kevin Dillon, Joe Mantegna, James McGowan, Natalie Brown, and Jean Yoon. Now, the movie Compulsion succeeds in making the plot very complex, but in its world saturated by fantasy and fiction, it also comes across as confusing in terms of tones and behavior patterns. The color palettes and the food obsessions are so exquisite to look at, it may surely make your mouth water. But everywhere else, going for this movie results in one muddled mess. If you're an aficionado of over the top obsessive antics and psychological drama, you may get a kick out of Compulsion. And director Egidio Coccimiglio serves up a fine dish of psychological thriller mixed in with some dark comedy and also some great mystery too for added measure, which the study of domestic decadence mixed with exotic culinary delights that are really just good enough to eat. I mean, some of the concoctions that Heather Graham's character makes, oh god, I just feel like I could just wish I could just jump into the screen and sit down and sample some of her delectable delights. So here is how the movie goes. It goes a little something like this. Carrie-Anne Moss stars as Saffron Nelson, a one-time child movie star who was abused off camera, has now become a frightened journalist for a sex magazine, and one day she has just gone completely missing in action. Okay, so she's not starring in movies anymore. She's now settling a humble life in an apartment where she spends most of her time reading lines off of a script and giving advice to women in a woman's magazine. So this leads to Detective Reynolds, played by Joe Mantegna, on the case to find her missing whereabouts. Reynolds' searching has led to the apartment home of Saffron's neighbor, Amy, played by Heather Graham. The home that she lives in seems very clean, and the character herself has a total fixation for cooking new, exciting, and curiously delicious foods. It's like a comfort zone to Amy to please the people around her, which also includes her womanizing friend, her womanizing, I don't know whether it's a boyfriend, a live-in boyfriend, a husband, or a fiance. I'm not sure, but I know his name is Fred, played by Kevin Dillon. He has some kind of office job. I guess he's some top executive. He also has a parrot, a gray parrot by the name of Sebastian. So Amy's dream job is to one day be like the next Rachel Ray, and host her own cooking show, and to exhibit her foods and ideas in front of a worldwide audience. With her life progressively crumbling down in front of her, she tries to gain reassurance from Saffron and to please her with her cooking, making herself on the brink of a reclusive lifestyle. Saffron, feeling bad for Amy, decides to take up her Gale Force Company and allows her services to prevail. You know, one of the things about this movie is that I always found quite imaginative is that I'm beginning to think that both Amy and Saffron have their fair share of mental disorders. On the one hand, we have Amy, who may have some obsessive compulsive behavior mixed in with possibly Asperger's syndrome, meaning that she lives off of cooking, which is her only real passion and her only real obsession. She's also obsessive compulsive disorder to the terms that um she's always very finicky about the foods she cooks, which of course drives her beau Fred crazy. I mean, he's kind of like comes to a point where he becomes kind of sick and tired of it. She's always asking him, "Is it too spicy? Is it too salty? Did I put enough nutmeg? Did I put enough ginger in the soup? Did I put enough pepper? Did I put too much pepper in the steak?" You know, that that's kind of like basically what her conversations on the dinner table is like. Meanwhile, on the case of Saffron, we could kind of understand why she is also traumatized in a depressive state. She, of course, was a former childhood star, but she was pressured a lot by her tyrannical mother, and of course she was also sexually assaulted by several agents, including one person in particular. And she has been, of course, traumatized, even though she is a much admired child star actor who has been in a slew full of movies over the years when she was young. Now she can barely catch a big break. So she kind of lives off of her advice column in the magazines. And of course, every time she tries to go to the station, the to audition for a part, she's always gets turned down because of the fact that she's not the bright sprite 20-year-old. She's probably most likely to be in her 40s. But yet, but so she seems to often get turned down from a lot of roles. And you could also see how the contrary differences between Amy and Saffron goes in terms of their colors. First of all, we have bright, bubbly, sparkly Amy, who seems like she always lights up an atmosphere, especially when she's pretending that her apartment is a television studio where she's cooking another exotic meal to our worldwide audience. But then when we cut to a darker tone on the screen, we come to realize that she's not actually entertaining anybody. She's alone in her apartment. She's alone with her food. And she hardly has really anybody to try out her culinary delights. And so she wants to try to get Amy to. So Amy tries to persuade Saffron into trying out her indulgences. But that's also to no avail. Not because not because Saffron snubs at her, but because Saffron happens to have an eating disorder. I mean, when you think about Amy and Saffron, these are two really fucked up individuals. One wants to get into television and movies, while another one pretty much seems like she can't get a break anymore. And you could also tell the differences in the clothes they wear. You know, Amy is wearing light, colorful clothes, and when she performs her cooking by pretending she's at a TV studio and her cooking, she's wearing, attractive, bright, colorful apparel with stiletto heels. Whereas Saffron, most of the time, is seen dressed predominantly in dark clothes, and she hardly really has very much electricity or very much ways of entertaining herself. She doesn't really have much electricity except for her laptop. I mean, she does a lot of her reclusive time under candlelight. And if you're gonna look for something to eat in Saffron's fridge, well, forget it. There's nothing there because she doesn't eat very much. She smokes, but she doesn't eat very much. She's actually pretty dour and depressing at times. But still, Amy has a great fondness for Saffron, and although Saffron tries her best to sort of steer away from Amy, it comes to a point where Amy's friendship with Saffron comes to a point of becoming obsessive and maybe even sometimes lustful. The movie is truly a reboot of the 1995 Korean film 301/302, which focuses on the macabre tale of obsessive traits in an eccentric friendship, as an eccentric friendship brews, in which Amy finds ways to keep her unhealthy, clean home intact with her sexual fixture of food, to keep her husband wrapped around her finger, in spite of Fred's lust for other women. Now, the reason why Fred seems to be going after other women is because, like I said, he can't stand the obsession of cooking that Amy possesses. He's been flirting with other women who would rather prefer to go to a nearby burger joint and to ingest his appetite with burgers and fries rather than filet mignon with a lemon butter sauce. He would rather be in the company of someone who enjoys more simple pleasures of eating rather than more complicated advanced stuff. And she seems to notice this. There even comes to a disturbing scene where she cooked his beloved pet parrot for dinner once, which of course eventually led to him moving out of her house, only to be never heard from again except through near the end of the movie, where Detective Reynolds actually did claim that he contacted him. It's unknown as to where he was staying. But the imaginary audience, with her imaginary audience, she cooks up exquisite dishes using state of the art equipment. Coccimiglio utilizes vibrant lighting to get a good grip on Amy's solitude, while at the same time which plays off to her loyal fans, or her make believe fans. It's clear that the culinary genius is in her as to escape from her troubles, but it's her inner madness that will likely keep the audience enthralled. She is just that unpredictable. Or unless, of course, you have a likings to exquisite foods. Maybe that's why people had stayed. Sometimes I think the foods that she cooks up is quite manipulative, but it's also very effective. So, legendary composer Vilmos Sigismund, he produces some elegant lighting and bright coloring to this picture, backed by a very sublime post production tinkering. The lighting is just really excellent, and I guess the visions of Amy's apartment and Saffron's apartment is just truly, truly amazing. And it's just so greatly honored that Vilmos Sigismund was there to make sure that the production design and the production and the cinematography work out very well. I mean, at least it wasn't a rather just a generic looking apartment. No, no. It was interesting. And the lighting is just excellent, and the timing was really good. It's a great movie to actually study upon, that rich and spontaneous and very and the costuming by Melissa Stewart has that Hollywood feeling going for it that Amy wears in her tight lair of her apartment. It certainly is a visual treat for the eyes filled with attention and voluminous detail, which could pass off as a meager budgeted mystery. The cinematic feel towards the human psyche, adding to the nourished touches towards the Saffron character as the perpetually uncomfortable star whose psychological scars are the results from the upper echelon in the film industry and her controlling mother. It may at first appear that this movie is quite easy to watch, even though the shock value doesn't quite materialize here. I mean, you don't see really anything that's shocking about this movie. I mean, Saffron's disappearance doesn't seem to come across as being very convincing, especially when Detective Reynolds interviews Amy about her disappearance. And we wonder what has become of Saffron. And the mystery is still unknown because it didn't have that snap to it. That's where the biggest weakness is. The shock value just isn't there. I know this movie was trying its best to be kind of more like a modernized Alfred Hitchcock type story with mystery and intrigue, but it does not really fully get that grasp going. It's like, so what happened to Saffron? Where did she go? I don't know. Did did Amy took her remains and cooked her and fed her to Detective Reynolds? That's kind of the impression I get. If it is, then that's gotta be one of the sickest things I have ever seen. It's a possibility. And then when he took a taste of her, he decided to just drop all charges. I mean, where does she go from here? The ending is not very, very inspiring. And then we see a final scene which could be either just Amy and Saffron pretending to see each other through a imaginary montage as they're sitting there dining and eating together. And then all of a sudden, it fades to darkness. And there we see Amy just sampling her own culinary delights by herself. So there's a lot of confusion in this movie, which really bogs this movie down quite a lot. Otherwise than that, this is a pretty interesting and enthralling story. But in order for it to work, you have to have a connection to the audience. This movie does not have that connection. Also, the casting can be kind of hit or miss. Heather Graham plays her role as Amy quite flawlessly, as a woman whose dangerous food obsession makes her imprisoned in her own craft with no one really to share her food and her knowledge. So Heather Graham, she actually exhibits a graceful aura with the inner psyche which is hidden inside of her as she makes her character perky and high-spirited. But obviously she's got issues hidden and she actually hides them quite well. But however, scriptwriter Floyd Byers is very contrary to that. Carrie-Anne Moss has suffered the same fate of being somewhat miscast as a neurotic has-been actress who's totally past her prime. The chemistry by the two leads, they're not exactly compelling, even though, yes, Amy is somewhat obsessed by Saffron. Saffron just does not have any interest in her. And then, once they discover that both of them are troubled souls, the whole misery deserves company. And even though they actually get engaged in a rather erotic sex scene near the end, before which of course is the events that leads to Saffron's disappearance. Yes, that's right. That's right. Amy and Saffron do get it on with each other. Saffron, of course, eventually says to Amy that if you really love me, would you do something for me? I mean, if you really, really are into me. So we don't even know as to whether or not Saffron had any suicidal intentions, which would lead to her grotesque death, and Amy's somewhat nonchalant concern for Saffron's disappearance. So we get very confused in the story, which really has you wondering. Of course, it gives the audience maybe its liberation to draw their own conclusions. Maybe that's what the intention was. But to me, it just really never took off and was never really convincing. I'll say, in spite of the chemistry not being really all that compelling, they did turn in a passable effort to demonstrate just how fragile these women are in the worlds they live in. The mandatory finale requires a strong need for some motivation to wrap up the movie. However, when we get there, a fascination of oral sex rather than a shocking ending. It makes the whole concept very puzzling, as more bonding was in store for Amy and Saffron, which nudges them in more of their acts of dedication. And I also felt that the finale ends way too rushed, and the only thing you get out of the conclusion is an unsatisfying punchline. I mean, the thing about this movie is that it had so much more potential for a psychological thriller, but in the end, it feels like we have been cheated. It was trying its best to be Alfred Hitchcock, but it also kind of somewhat failed on a lot of levels. And that is kind of the reason why this movie was deterred from its potential. I mean, it's not like I was coming in with high expectations. I wasn't. This wasn't going to be a Gemini winner or a Genie winner or something like that. It's not. It wasn't. Definitely not in a long shot. It was colorful. It was bright. It was saccharine. It had a lot of great dark tones to it. But in the end, the plot really brought it down. The performances were overall hit or miss. And the finale just was not very convincing. So when I first came into this movie, if it was, I would have ranked it a 7, but because of these things that have kind of let down in this movie, I have to give Compulsion a 5. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.